And I wanted to welcome everybody to our Powering Ahead What's Next for Louisiana Energy webinar. We've got some interesting things we want to talk about today in a variety of topics, all built around Louisiana's oil and gas industry. And we appreciate all of you for taking the time today to listen to some of the leaders in oil and gas in the state and some of the people who make very important decisions to our industry in Louisiana. And so as we go through the next little while, there's a few things that we're going to talk about related to the economics of the industry, and more importantly, or as important, things that we can do as people who support oil and gas in Louisiana to make a difference in the future of the industry in our state, and learn more about what we can do to grow oil and gas in Louisiana. So as we get started, there are a couple of things we wanted to talk about. First, the Grow Louisiana Coalition is a coalition of 106,000 supporters of oil and gas in Louisiana. We began our work 6 years ago to bring people together with one voice around oil and natural gas in Louisiana in partnership with organizations like the Louisiana Oil and Gas Association and Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association, so that the people who make decisions about the future of Louisiana can hear from the people who make Louisiana's economy go. And that's the people of Louisiana's oil and natural gas industry. And we've been working on things like this. Some of you may have seen us at Industry Day at the Capitol in Baton Rouge, and with the things we're dealing with across the globe, we weren't able to do that this year in Baton Rouge. So we decided to come to everybody virtually and bring them the same type of information and opportunities for them to speak out through our computers and other screens that we would have done, hopefully in 2021, we'll do in person. So as we get started, we want to thank our partners today. One Acadiana, the Iberia Chamber of Commerce, the Port of Iberia, and Lamoga and Loga are all organizations we worked with for a long time who support oil and gas in Louisiana. And we encourage you to stay active in those organizations and thank them for helping us promote today. As we get started, there's some things in terms of issues and how this chat will go. You are more than welcome to submit comments to us. And as we go through our panel and then ultimately our conversation with Senator Cassidy, we'd be more than happy to answer some questions that you may have. Go ahead and enter them in the Q&A button on this webinar site, and we can take it from there. So to get us started, we are going to have a panel discussion with some of the leaders in oil and gas in Acadiana, as well as the state of Louisiana. Right now, as we look at oil and gas in Louisiana, there are situations that we are all too familiar with, unfortunately, that in the minds of the people of the industry and in Grow Louisiana's mind are hurting the potential growth of our industry in the state. And one of those things are things that we're living with every day, and that's the economics of the industry. And there are things many times within the price of oil and the economics of oil and gas around the world that we can't control. But there are many things that are happening in Louisiana around our industry that we can control and make a difference around. And right now, there are things happening with our legal climate in the state, as well as what we're doing to help businesses that are within the industry grow and diversify that we need to pay attention to. And most importantly, we have decisions we can make as voters and as citizens who support oil and gas in the next month that can do a lot about moving our industry on the right path in Louisiana to help it grow. And one of the key areas in what we are going to talk about is the legal climate in the state of Louisiana and what we're dealing with. And right now, there's an election for district attorney in Lafayette Parish, Vermilion Parish, and Acadia Parish, the same jurisdiction. And you wouldn't think off the top of your head, well, why would a district attorney's election be important to the future of the oil and gas business in Acadiana and all across Louisiana? And it's important for this reason. There are a small group of trial lawyers that are working daily to try and sue oil and gas companies that have been working in Louisiana for a century, so that they can move forward massive lawsuits that are ill-conceived and misspent in Louisiana to try and make money off of the industry. And when some of these lawyers couldn't get what they wanted out of specific parishes, in particular the Vermilion Parish Police Jury, these same lawyers have decided to circumvent the system and try to go through the district attorney's office to get what they couldn't get from the elected bodies in our different parishes. And one of those places that are right in the middle of the fight is the district attorney's office in Lafayette, Acadia, and Vermilion parishes. And years ago, a few years ago, not too long, the Vermilion Parish Police Jury voted unanimously to support oil and gas and to not sue the industry over coastal issues, choosing instead to work together with the industry to address the coast challenges that we have. But the district attorney at the time, who is now leaving office, decided to take it upon themselves to sue the industry anyway. And when you go to the polls and vote, you have a lot of decisions to make. And one of those areas is who's going to represent us as the district attorney in where we live. And we want you to take a look as you make your decision and think about which candidate is going to advance the industry forward and move away from oil and gas lawsuits. So that's a big issue. The second issue is around what we can do is to grow and grow as an industry and help each other. And one of those areas is around Hurricane Laura. And with Hurricane Laura, we've all been affected by that throughout the state of Louisiana. And the oil and gas industry has been at the forefront helping people recover. And as of last week, $4.5 million had been invested and donated by industry companies to help people who've been affected in Cameron and Calcasieu and other areas in southwest Louisiana. And we've been on the ground donating 50,000 gallons at last count of fuel to people who needed to power their generators, need gas and fuel for their cars and trucks to get from place to place and to get about the business of restoring their homes and rebuilding their communities. We're going to stay on the ground there. And what we encourage everybody here, if you've already been a part of Hurricane Laura recovery efforts, thank you. And you can find out more about how to get involved by going to growlouisianacoalition.com, and under the heading of Powering Ahead, you can find out about how you can donate and get involved as a volunteer. So those are some things we wanted to get out of the way. And we're going to move right into our panel discussion, followed by Senator Cassidy. We have three panelists with us today to talk about the future of the oil and gas business in Louisiana. Our first panelist is State Representative Jean-Paul Cousin, who represents District 45, and that includes portions of Lafayette in Acadiana. And he's serving right now as the chairman of the Natural Resources and Environment Committee. And we appreciate him being here, especially since he had a bill in committee about 5 minutes ago. And so he's made his way into the chamber and is going to be with us for the next few minutes, along with Mike Moncla. Mike is the interim president of Louisiana Oil and Gas Association, and he serves as the CEO for a third-generation family workover business, Moncla Companies, that's based in Lafayette. Mike's on the board of the LAGCO, Louisiana Gulf Coast Oil Exposition, and is the chairman of the Lord's Foundation, and has long been very active in Louisiana's oil and gas business and lending his voice into talking to people in Baton Rouge and beyond about what's important for the future growth of the industry in the state. And finally, we're going to welcome Greg Gautreaux, who's the president and CEO of the Lafayette Economic Development Authority. LEDA has contributed substantially to the economic growth and stability of Lafayette, Acadiana, and Louisiana through the organization's role in retaining and attracting some of the area's most influential businesses. Greg is the chair of Louisiana Industrial Development Executives Association and a board member for the Southern Economic Development Council, all experts on what's happening in oil and gas, not only in Louisiana, but potentially across the country. And we appreciate, gentlemen, you joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
So we're going to go ahead and get started with you, Representative. Why don't you give us an update on what's happening right now in Baton Rouge for a few minutes, and talk to us more about where you see Louisiana's oil and gas industry headed, and where the growth opportunities might be, and how you can help us in Baton Rouge.
Sure. You just mentioned I came out of my own committee, which is always nice to have a bill go through your committee as a chairman. So it went through quite smoothly, but it's a concurrent resolution basically bringing federal agencies, FEMA and the DEQ, Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, to the table to discuss coordinating the removal of oil field equipment that's been abandoned and has been washed ashore across South Louisiana after a natural disaster. In this case, it was after Hurricane Laura. So these are tanks that we can't identify an owner of, and we're as a state, it's a good public policy to get this removed from our marshes. So my concurrent resolution is basically bringing everybody together to identify the funding and identify the process whereby we can remove any liability from getting this stuff off of these folks' land, and dealing with some of the accessibility issues to the land itself through the landowners. So that's what I'm working on personally through the special session. But we're also dealing with another bill that's going to deal with a temporary reduction of severance taxes for oil and gas operations on reworking of bills. Representative de Villiers has been an ardent supporter of the oil and gas industry, and again, he's brought a bill for us to kind of look at and see if it's the right move for us at this time, which I believe it is, to incentivize oil and gas operations in the state of Louisiana. As you know, we have some of the highest severance taxes in the United States at 12.5%. We think temporarily removing that severance tax while we're trying to get the industry back on its feet is the right move. They put a extraordinarily high fiscal note on the bill, which, it could be a death knell in many cases. But I think we've got the right approach to kind of explain to our members why, you can't squeeze blood from a turnip. If we don't have the production, you won't get any severance taxes to begin with. So we should be reworking these wells and getting what production we have left with our mom and pop operations that we have left in the state. Other than that, I know that it's going to be a long haul for the oil and gas industry and for Acadiana. We're looking at the year 2022, 2023 for a full return right now. Lawrence Scott, economist, has identified those as the time that it's going to take to get back on our feet. But in the meantime, we need to incentivize and put policies in place that attract capital to Louisiana and not detract capital. We think our bills that have dealt with the coastal lawsuits are the right moves. And although one of our bills didn't pass last year, this past session, the resolution that we passed memorializing our request for 6 parishes in the city of New Orleans to basically to dismiss their lawsuits is the right move for the state of Louisiana. We should not be looking at this from a parish by parish and city by city perspective. This is a state issue, and the state of Louisiana should be determining whether or not these coastal lawsuits dealing with coastal permits moves forward. So we're going to keep fighting on that front. We're going to, have to have some major strategy sessions, knowing that we didn't get it done this past session. We ran out of time. But, with 6 parishes and one of the largest cities in the state involved, you can imagine that's a ton of legislators who are impacted, who are getting pressured from their locals to do things that might not be in support of our oil and gas industry. So, we've got a fight on our hands, and it's a public policy battle that I'm willing to be a part of. I know Mr. Monklaw is willing to be a part of it, and we've got a lot of allies over here at the Capitol that are going to be a part of it over the years and sessions to come.
Well, thank you, Representative, because I think you brought up all very, very good issues. I want to bring Greg and Mike into the conversation, and we'll start with Greg. It's striking that Dr. Scott talks about 2022, 2023 as the full recovery of the industry. And what are the things, in order for us to get from where we are today to where we want to be and beyond, we have to think differently. I mean, that's what seems to be clear in all parts of everything we're doing in daily life, really. So starting with you, Greg, building off of what the representative shared, what are the things that we need to do looking at the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years from now to help the industry grow in Louisiana, and Acadiana first and then beyond? Greg, then Mike.
I think that it's very important that we understand that we've got some things in the way of any industry coming here, and we need to remove those, and it would help the oil and gas industry as well. But first and foremost, we as a nation need to understand that if we don't become economically independent from the rest of the world in terms of petroleum, in terms of energy independence, in terms of medical independence, and in terms of critical R&D and manufacturing independence, we haven't learned anything from this pandemic. It's obvious to me that we need to understand that these countries, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, are not our friends. And we need to prepare to do whatever it takes, and that includes embargoes and sanctions and anything that it takes to be 100% American made in our oil and gas industry. And we need to help our petrochemical industry get there too.
Mike, as a business owner, what are the things that you're looking at in terms of keeping your business going, and then how to build it even better in Louisiana?
Well, the last 6 years have been a struggle for everyone, in the oil and gas industry, especially in Louisiana. South Louisiana, we don't have a shale play, which is the new sexy term that, the Wall Street, private equity money and hedge funds all want to chase that money, push their money out of these shale plays. Well, Louisiana only has one shale play right now. That is the Haynesville Shale up in Shreveport. That is the only bright spot in Louisiana. For South Louisiana, we just have the traditional stuff, and we still have good rocks. We still have a lot of production in the ground. The problem is with the price at $40 a barrel, and that is the telltale of everything. I mean, it's just not going to move the needle for a lot of activity for what we're doing here in South Louisiana. And I'll go on to say, I think that for South Louisiana to be back to prosperous, we need $75 oil. And the reason I say that is, you hear all the time, XYZ oil company says their break even is 37, or XYZ, ABC says it's 42. Well, that might be their break even, but the service sector, which is what Lafayette is, the hub city, we can't make money on the service side at $40 a barrel because the oil company's not making enough money. So they keep pushing back on vendors, and then we got to try to push back on our vendors. And so nobody on the service side has made money in 6 years. So the oil companies are barely making it, and the service companies are working at a loss. So for the service side to really recover, we need something that is so profitable for the oil companies that the service side can go back, go up on rate.
Greg, I'm going to start with Greg this time and then go to Representative Kusan. Greg, how do you think, off of what Mike was talking about in terms of the service sectors and in preparing for the next few years, what are the things that we can be doing from an economic standpoint, even from a business growth standpoint, that can get us to where both of you were describing, get us to the level of independence you described, Greg, and get businesses like service businesses into a better economic position so that they can grow and hire more people?
Well, it's important to know, number one, that our federal delegation has to help us. Obviously, if we're talking about embargoes, price supports, tariffs, those would have to happen because of a federal mandate. We've talked for years about an energy policy that we've never had. We deserve the same, if not more, support than companies that are considered crucial, like airlines. Then from a local standpoint, I think John Paul characterized it perfectly. We have a few things that we can do. Number one is work with the industry so that we are a place they can make money. Now, there are a few other quick things that also make sense from a statewide perspective, and I'll just say this because they're really, hindrances to all business development. Our K-12 education system really holds us back compared to other states. We are in a situation where companies have to do too much training. This is I'm echoing the words of every CEO that we talk to on a regular basis. We talk to over 500 a year. Our tax system is the worst in the country when you look at our tax rates. People complain about incentives, but we have to give incentives to offset our ridiculous tax rates. Therefore, that brings us to the next step. Our state is a very litigious state. We have a litigious reputation. This is really something that hurts our image and it hurts our economy directly, and you see it in the oil and gas industry. So to tie those together, Mark, business wants certainty, and business is risk averse. Workforce concerns, relying on incentives, and litigation are signs of uncertainty, and they are red flags to business.
Representative, I want to come to you on that and what Greg was saying about the legal climate, because you were very clear in talking about the legislation and the efforts that were made during the regular session this year, trying to stem off these types of lawsuits. And one of the things that's very interesting, according to the state's Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, in the last 5 years, Louisiana's oil and gas industry directly paid $230 million into coastal projects. That's directly from the industry. Lawsuits against the industry that are allegedly for coastal purposes have not created a dollar, zero, not a cent. And so on the one hand, we have the largest industry in the state investing through things that have been set up through the state and by companies themselves, investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the coast. But the biggest threat we face to the economic future of the industry are misguided lawsuits against the industry. So how do we help you when we get into the 2021 legislative session and even sooner? How do we help you get this message across better to the people that need to hear it?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. The point that you made about the industry itself funding these restoration projects through the fees that they pay, and in some cases through their just altruism. We made that point on the House floor while we were advocating for our bill this year. This past session, we passed the tort reform for auto insurance rates. Obviously, that while that didn't impact the either the legacy lawsuits or the coastal lawsuits impacting the oil and gas industry, we are trying to send a message to the country that Louisiana is open for business and that we're trying to move past this litigious this reputation that we have. So the tort reform debate was a huge debate, I think, for all industries. Like Mr. Gautreaux said earlier, there's some things that kind of cross all different industries, and the tort reform debate was one of them. So that was a big step in the right direction. That bill becomes effective January 1st. Obviously, we'll wait for the next couple of years to see what impact it has on insurance rates and and to our reputation itself. What can we do as your organization, as LaMoga, as LOGO, continue to be engaged with legislators? We can't forget that legislators represent their own districts. We cannot take anything for granted from those legislators. We have to work with individual legislators on our priorities, explain to them still to this day, because it's kind of seems like we don't have to do that, but explain to them the importance of the oil and gas economy to the state of Louisiana, the hundreds and millions and billions of dollars that it's brought to our state, and what the hundreds of millions of dollars can do in the future towards that K through 12 education, towards the Louisiana Community College education system that we have, towards our higher education system. Those are the things that our oil and gas industry funds from a state perspective. We need to put the pieces together so that everyone across the aisle, from the political perspective, from the geographic perspective, from places that don't have oil and gas operations in the state, why it's still important for them to support our severance tax bills, to support our reform bills on the coastal litigation or the legacy lawsuit bills, Act 312 issues that we haven't looked at in a few years. We need to continue to focus on legislators who are making the votes and not take things for granted. That's my ask to the associations like yourself and to just individual legislators. We've got to continue advocating for our cause. We cannot take anything for granted.
I appreciate you sharing that in the way that you did, because one of the things we realized, and we were very active in getting the people of the industry to speak up this past regular legislative session, specifically against lawsuits. And we did see instances when the people of the industry speak up, actions are taken. And I would say, as we're having this conversation, and I'm gonna kick it to Mike in a second to talk about something else that's on the ballot in November. But this goes all the way to the parish level, because with our state legislators, who we see quite a bit, we're always hearing stories about and seeing the news about what you're doing to help impact the state's economy, make changes that are better for the people of the state. What we sometimes, I think, forget as the people of the industry is that when you go parish by parish, all the way across the I-10 corridor in Louisiana and now up into northwest and central Louisiana, there are local bodies making decisions about the future of oil and gas in Louisiana. And if we have a police jury member or a parish council person, we need to be talking to them in the same way you just described, I think, where we're telling them we're paying attention to the decisions you make, because when you decide to move into some lawsuit that somebody's convinced you to do without all the information, you're impacting the future of Louisiana's most important industry, and that needs to change. Now, for Mike, as we're going through some of these things, I know lawsuits are a very passionate topic for you, and you can go ahead and give us your latest on that. I also want to give you the opportunity to talk about something that's on the ballot November 3rd, which is Constitutional Amendment 2, and why that's important. And you may have something to add there too, Representative and Greg, but go ahead and tell us where you are on lawsuits and tell us more about Constitutional Amendment 2.
Okay. Yeah. I'm certainly passionate about these lawsuits. Our number one business, Montclair Marine, we ended up closing the doors on that business. It was business that annually did over $40 million a year in revenues, over $20 million a year in state payrolls, employed over 300 people. And the coastal erosion lawsuits has totally just bankrupted that business. Basically, it's closed off. We had to sell barges for pennies on the dollar. There are barges that I wouldn't have sold for $5 million 6 years ago that we sold for $30,000. So that's what those lawsuits have done to the entire barge market. And the sad thing is, if you have a well on land, the well might be the Broussard number 1 or the Boudreaux number 1. And these landowners are very fortunate to have a well on their property. Well, the inland waters wells are all on state lease properties. So when we go work over a well on the water, it might be the, Plaquemine Parish School Board number 640 or the Lafourche Parish School Board number 320. There's literally thousands of wells on state properties that are, owned by the state, the royalties estates, the severance estates. And so these lawsuits have chased away the state's revenue. And, not to mention the business, the payroll taxes, the income taxes, and the money that people spend when they're employed. So, yeah, I'm real passionate about it. And that business is never going to come back, the barge side. As far as the Constitutional Amendment number 2, we are excited that it's finally on the ballot. We have been in arguments, negotiations and arguments with the assessor's office for almost 30 years on what's the fairest way and best way to assess an oil well. And we finally have the opportunity. The assessors are on our side, the oil companies in agreement, and the House and Senate both passed it with 0 no votes. So the stars are in line, and we just need the citizens of Louisiana to say yes to the amendment. And what it basically does is it takes the ability, or it gives the ability to the assessors to value the well on the income the well is making, instead of just a fair market or cost approach, which is currently valuing it at what it would cost to drill that well today. So it's certainly something that we've been looking for a long time, and will be advantageous to have for our industry.
Well, we're gonna be wrapping up our panel in just a minute, and so as we move along, I'd like to give you guys one final question, and we'll start with Greg, and then go to you, Representative, and finish with Mike. This is the same question for all three of you. What is the one thing that you think, as someone who supports oil and gas in Louisiana, between now and the end of the year, what's the most important thing we need to be doing? There are people who own businesses on this call. There are people who work for oil and gas businesses. There are people who are married to people working in the industry, or have kids or loved ones in the industry. What's the thing we need to be doing, Greg, as supporters of oil and gas in Louisiana, that can help you do a better job and do more in what you want to do to help the industry? Greg, then Representative Kusan, and then Mike.
Well, we need to understand the cost in order beyond the industry. people say there are 40,000 people working in the oil industry that have lost jobs or could lose jobs. The truth is, in the value chain, there are 200,000 people in Louisiana alone. So what can we do? We've got to continue to understand that this industry is our bellwether. It is the industry that we need to nurture. The way you nurture industry is by getting government out of the way. In this case, we may have to have government intervention as a critical national industry. And so I believe we should ask our federal delegation to make us move in the direction, do whatever it takes to become energy independent and to support American oil and gas. I think that's the number one thing we can do. I think along with what Jean Paul and the legislature will do, certainly reforms of all kinds, certainly treating wells, Mike, like you treat a building. And so it just seems unfair that the oil industry has been the goose that laid the golden egg, but now when times are tough, we tend to look away, and we can't look away. There are no Green New Deals that are going to save us. We've got to move forward with the national and statewide policy. Policy change is number one.
Representative, I was just alerted that Senator Cassidy's on the line, so we're going to, at the risk of getting on Mike's bad side, we're going to go ahead and let you have the last word on the panel. So what's the one thing we need to be doing to help you or make oil and gas grow in Louisiana?
Well, I could say this. Greg was just talking about the policy, so he was kind of putting it on us, but I'm going to turn it back on him. We need to look at what resources that we have right now to create jobs. We've got the geologic resources. We still have our natural resources that Mike talked about earlier. But more importantly, we still have the human resources. We have the people in Louisiana that are willing to work, many of whom who are still in the oil and gas industry or who want to come back. We need to look at what capabilities we have to attract manufacturing jobs that we already have the shops for, the people who are still able to weld, the people who are still able to operate the machines that are still used in the industry. What can we do to create immediate jobs while at the same time waiting for the global market for oil and gas to come back to support the prices like Mike just talked about? So I think we look at what we have, the human resources, our current natural resources, and then we do what Greg said. We look at our policies on the taxes that attract businesses, and we look at our education system, the changes that we need to make to attract businesses and people. And then finally, on the lawsuit side, again, we need to make changes that attract businesses and make us look less litigious than we have looked at in the past. So those are the three big goals of ours in the short term, and honestly, for the rest of this term. I mean, that's the whole thing that we're looking at right now.
I think that sums it up pretty well. I appreciate you gentlemen joining us. JP, thank you. Greg, thank you. And Mike, thank you. We're going to go ahead and shift now to our keynote speaker, Senator Bill Cassidy. And I'm going to introduce to host that conversation, Lori LeBlanc. Lori is the vice president at the Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association. She's grown up in the oil field in Terrebonne and Lafourche parishes and has done a lot of work down in Terrebonne and Lafourche and all over South Louisiana to help bolster Louisiana's oil and gas industry and make it go. Lori.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to moderate this session with U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our U.S. Senator for Louisiana. Dr. Cassidy grew up in Baton Rouge, and he attended LSU for undergraduate and medical school. In 1990, Bill joined LSU Medical School teaching medical students and residents at Earl K. Long Hospital, which is a hospital for the uninsured. During this time, Dr. Cassidy co-founded the Greater Baton Rouge Community Clinic. This is a clinic providing free dental and health care to the working uninsured. He created a private-public partnership to vaccinate 36,000 Greater Baton Rouge area children against hepatitis B at no cost to the schools or parents. In the wake of Hurricane Katrina, Dr. Cassidy led a group of healthcare volunteers to convert an abandoned Kmart building into an emergency healthcare facility, providing basic healthcare to hurricane evacuees. In 2006, Dr. Cassidy was elected to the Louisiana State Senate. In 2008, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives to represent Louisiana's 6th Congressional District. In 2014, Dr. Cassidy was elected to the U.S. Senate. He serves on the Finance Committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and the Veteran Affairs Committees. He is the chairman of the Energy Subcommittee of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, where he works to ensure America has balanced, comprehensive energy policy that protects industry jobs and supports our economic future. So with that, Dr. Cassidy, Senator Cassidy, welcome to today. We look forward to your comments here today, and I know I have very much enjoyed working with you on bolstering up and ramping up and doing everything we can to ensure that America has accessible, affordable oil and gas for our country. Welcome, Senator Cassidy.
Hey, thank you, Laura. Thank you for having me. I got on just as Greg was speaking about the goose and the golden egg. And there's a lot of prosperity for families that otherwise would not have it because of great jobs created in the entire ecosystem of oil and gas. And I go all the way upstream, downstream, the support industry, the oil field service, the boat builders, you name it. I consider that all part of the ecosystem. And I say that because I think we need to have if we're going to fight for Louisiana energy and Louisiana jobs and Louisiana companies, and for American energy in general, we have to have kind of a near-term, an intermediate, and a long-term strategy and perspective. If we do that, then we'll kind of support that which we have and actually have a robust growth going forward. And without it, we're always going to be at the mercy of exterior forces that kind of buffet us back and forth. So let me start with that. What would be a near-term strategy, if you will? First, let's look at the near-term issues. We've had incredible demand destruction, not just the Saudi-Russian price war, which, by the way, I think I was the first person to introduce a bill saying that if the Saudis are hell-bent on keeping prices below market, below their cost of production, why don't we withdraw our troops from Saudi Arabia? Why do I have somebody from Louisiana protecting a kingdom which is destroying my state's economy? The president just got on a phone call with MBS and said, listen, if you don't do something about these below market prices, we're going to pull our troops, at which point he found a deal with the Russians and began to raise the prices. Now, that is good, but only so far. Ultimately, we need our economy to recover. We need people driving, people flying, people, you name it, using that fuel that we produce in the Gulf of Mexico and onshore. One example, I was told by a guy who hedged on the price of oil that when we shut down international flights, that took 3 million barrels of oil out of production. You don't need jet fuel? 3 million barrels a day were no longer used for the jets flying internationally. And he said, if you look at it, there's a fairly steep demand curve. If this is kind of status quo, if you add 3 million barrels, the price of oil falls pretty quickly. We need to restore the demand of flights. What else? How do we get there? Well, I see Laurie on my screen right now. I don't see anybody else. And Laurie's much prettier than Jean-Paul and Mark and Greg. So I'm very pleased to see Laurie. But it is my observation in life that women rule the world. That if a mama says that the family's not going to take a vacation because she's fearing that if they go to New Orleans for a night on the town in a restaurant, that if she's fearing that she's going to get ill, they're not going. And if dad takes the kids, dad and the kids are going to be sleeping by themselves for 14 days until mama is comfortable that no one's going to get infected. So until families are comfortable that they can travel and not get infected, they're not going to travel. And that whole economy that comes about because of that will not get restarted. So we have to have, I'm speaking as a physician, but I think if we're going to speak near term, how do we restore demand? One answer has to be reassure people that you can resume normal life. Now, by the way, you can lift restrictions, but there was actually a study that looked at a town in Illinois that had restrictions on going out, curfews, you couldn't go out because of COVID, and a town across the Mississippi River in Iowa, which had no restrictions. They both had the same suppression of economic activity. It goes back to what I said. If my wife is not happy, we're not taking the trip. And I think what's true in my family is probably pretty true in most families. Everybody has to be on board. Men are stupid. Men will take a risk, right? That's why men go off to war more commonly than women. Women are the ones who are going to protect their home. Again, if they're not comfortable, it's not going to happen. So near term, we have to have a testing strategy and a testing strategy which can reassure families, particularly women, that they can safely go out in the economy and not place themselves and their families at risk. I think the Trump administration has made great strides on this. If you notice their strategy, they are trying to protect those people who are at highest risk of being infected. Think your frontline workers in hospitals, and the highest risk, those at highest risk of dying if they are infected. Think people in nursing homes. My mother-in-law was in a nursing home. We couldn't visit her. You could look through the window, you could look at her on FaceTime, but you could not go and see my mother-in-law. Because if you went in there and you brought COVID and it spread throughout that nursing home, there was going to be a very high death rate. It's interesting because you don't read that someone who's 90 years old who had bed sores, diabetes, and emphysema died. You just read that someone died from COVID. There's an emotional impact of a high death rate from COVID. Even if the person dying probably only has 1 year of life expectancy left. I'm not minimizing the tragedy. I'm just saying that there is a difference in someone dying when they're 90 and someone dying when they're 16. And the folks who are dying disproportionately were towards the end of their life. But nonetheless, the emotional impact it made kind of squashed economic activity. So for near term, we've got to have a testing strategy which reassures Americans they can resume normal activity, which includes driving and flying and everything else that creates demand, pull through demand for oil and gas. Secondly, by the way, one more thing we're doing, we're writing a bill that if the airlines get another bailout, that they have to give every American or every American below a certain income level a voucher for travel. There's a lot of people in our country who've never flown. If you sent them a voucher for $150 for a ticket and they could fly to New Orleans, they would say, I'm willing to take the risk because I've never flown. I've never seen New Orleans. Let's go see New Orleans and stay in a hotel. And all of a sudden you start creating demand. So we are trying to think imaginatively, how can we otherwise create demand, pull through, if you will, for oil and gas products. The second thing as regards creating demand, which I won't be in the next month or two, but could be in the next 6 months. I personally favor a very large infrastructure package. The federal taxpayer can borrow money at near 0% interest rates. So wouldn't it be great if now we borrowed $1 trillion? Not for 1 year, but $150 billion over the next 8 years, to finance a lot of projects around the country, which, by the way, would require pickup trucks and tractors and people to commute to the work site that would otherwise create demand for oil and gas. But, by the way, imagine if we had a new Mississippi River Bridge in Baton Rouge. Imagine if we had an I-49 complete from the Arkansas state line all the way down to New Orleans. Imagine if we had a new Calcasieu River Channel Bridge or a flyway from the I-10 over to the Louis Armstrong Airport in New Orleans. That's just Louisiana. An I-14 going east-west through Louisiana. That would create a heck of a lot of jobs. It would create demand for oil and gas, but it would also address inefficiencies in our economy related to inadequate infrastructure. So I think both Biden and Trump would be open to such an infrastructure package. Yes, it's deficit spending, but I actually believe it pays for itself because the interest rate is so low and the economic activity it would create to otherwise address it. Next, though, what do we do about intermediate? For the companies who are really struggling, we've been pushing for royalty relief. Now, the Department of Interior Secretary, David Bernhardt, says that he doesn't feel like he has the statutory ability to just give blanket relief. So we are trying to set up a mechanism by which they can apply. Some of them have just said it's not worth it, but we still want to maintain that option open and hopefully can make it work. That leads on to the next thing. Excuse me. A storm cloud, if you will, is that this president, has declared a moratorium on development in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. We've been working on a strategy. Let me give you a little background. I'm sorry. There's a little part of the eastern Gulf of Mexico adjacent to the central Gulf of Mexico that is beyond the sight lines from the beaches of Florida that could easily tie back into existing pipeline systems that oil and gas companies say could be a plentiful find, which could create more jobs for the oil and gas industry. There's a moratorium on developing that oil and gas until 2022. Now, the moratorium is only till 2022. Our point of leverage with the Floridians, who are adamantly opposed to this, is okay, in 2022 it all goes away, and theoretically we could drill up to 5 miles close to the beach. Well, they don't want that. So maybe we can work out a compromise where we give you a permanent moratorium within 100 miles or so of the coast, but we get to develop that portion of the eastern Gulf adjacent to the central Gulf. Now, the president, clearly locked in an electoral battle, recently declared that eastern Gulf of Mexico off limits. And by the way, he also declared the South Atlantic, and it appears he declared it off limits not just to oil and gas, but also to windmills as well. So we do think going forward, the fact that he's declared windmills off limit give us a point of leverage. The environmentalists would like to put windmills off the Atlantic coast. Frankly, helps Louisiana. We are building boats in South Louisiana to help erect windmills off the coast of Rhode Island. So we're creating jobs, wind energy jobs in South Louisiana, and as well they're building, at least they were a while ago, portions of the wind blades over in Michoud in New Orleans East. So there are people in South Louisiana who are involved in this industry. So we do think that helps contribute to the jobs. Most importantly, though, it gives us another point of leverage as we attempt to go forward and attempt to negotiate so that we can open up that eastern Gulf of Mexico. The bigger storm on the horizon, if Joe Biden wins, he says he doesn't want any more leases on federal lands. That would mean there would be no more leases in the central and western Gulf of Mexico. Now, speaking of killing the goose that laid the golden egg, those royalty payments and lease payments finance a lot of things that are important to our country, not least of which is coastal restoration in South Louisiana. We've already been hit by one hurricane. We're threatened by another. The faster and the better we can rebuild our coast, our wetlands on the coast, is the faster and better we are protected from these hurricanes, once more inundating and flooding major cities like New Orleans, etc. So we really need to work on that. And the environmentalists don't know what they're asking for. By the way, they just use some of that royalty revenue to pay for upkeep of our national parks. So there's a lot of money that revenue is used for that if we suddenly outlaw the drilling, we're going to be hurting as a country, not just in South Louisiana. But that's all part of his Green New Deal that he says he wants to push. So we just need to be aware of that. And I'll speak frankly, that's why I think it's better that Republicans win the presidency and hold the Senate but at least one or the other. So we'll see how that goes. So as we speak about the near term, which is get people traveling again and create demand by a big infrastructure package, intermediate term, which is what can we do about preserving oil and gas development and wind development off the coast. What about longer term strategies? One thing we have to recognize, there is a mega trend to a lower and lower carbon future. If we don't recognize that, we're going to be stranded. If we look like we're part of the problem, we're going to be isolated out, and we're going to be basically, called out and shot, if you will. If we look like we're part of the solution, we will be part of that solution going forward, preserving the jobs we have, and perhaps creating more in the future. One thing that we are working on is there's going to be significant tax credits for sequestration of CO2, 45QS. We're trying to make sure that there can be sequestration, that offshore sequestration would likewise qualify for some of these issues. So we think that this offshore sequestration would be a way to lower the carbon output, if you will, clean up the greenhouse gas emission profile, which is going to be important to any future Democratic administration, may also be important to some of our customers. Chaz Romer, Buddy Romer's son, is putting together an LNG export plant, and their selling point is they want to have net zero carbon emissions. And with those net zero carbon emissions, they think that will increase their marketability to those in the European Union. So we have to look at the customer wanting to have a better oil and gas profile when it comes to carbon emissions in terms of how they're going to do that. Next, I've already mentioned offshore wind. Us building boats and other Jones Act types equipment to support the development of offshore offshore wind is also important. And I do think that is one way that we can go forward. I've got two bills. One is the Coastal Act, the other is the Offshore Act, working with Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democratic senator from Rhode Island. Most likely you're going to need a bipartisan coalition to get these things through. And Sheldon, although very liberal, is actually pretty reasonable. And he's very concerned about coastal restoration in Louisiana and around the nation. And he recognizes that oil and gas development and wind energy going forward is going to be part of funding some of these things. So I could speak further, but I'd speak further on state issues such as legacy lawsuits as opposed to federal. So let me pause there, Laurie, and see if there's any questions.
Well, Senator Cassidy, all great points, all great ideas, and much needed at the federal level for our oil and gas industry. So I do have a question, but first let me just point out that I haven't been on vacation yet as a mom, and working in the oil and gas industry, we haven't been on vacation yet, but I can assure you that we have a vacation planned to Disney World for Thanksgiving holiday. So
They closed Disney World?
Well, they're reopening.
Are they? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're in the process. But I do have a question for you. So relative to your point regarding, what could happen in the Gulf of Mexico under a President Biden administration, we are really, we can be reminded of what happened in 2010 at the stroke of a pen. President Obama shut down the Gulf of Mexico, or drilling in the Gulf of Mexico with the moratorium. So we're really cognizant of the fact that this is critical. It's critical to our service companies here in Louisiana. We know that what happens offshore matters on. So between now and the end of the year, really, is there an opportunity to protect and secure the central and western Gulf of Mexico? Looking at legislation to really get that nailed in as far as protecting it, protecting those leases and protecting the permitting process so it cannot be just shut down with the stroke of a pen like we have seen in the past.
We're going to need to do some major deal with Democrats, because even if we're in the majority, it's going to be a 51-49 or it's going to be very close. And so we'd have to find some major concession to Democrats that might preserve and expand the access which we wish to have. And then I'll go back to, I think we do need to recognize their highest priority is decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. The degree to which we show that we're engaged in that effort is the degree which it will increase their comfort level in collaborating on this. I point out to them, we can develop oil and gas here with our environmental standards, or we can do it in Kazakhstan, or Iran, or Russia, or some place where they have no environmental standards. Or we can let China continue to burn coal, which is where really most of our greenhouse gas emissions come from. That said, they want to see that American greenhouse gas emissions go down. Now, whatever we think about climate change, I can tell you that is going to be their demand. And so if we're going to work on that bipartisan legislation, we have to think creatively about that. If we do, I think we can get a fair amount done. If we ignore it, you know, the old saying of what, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I think we're going to be on the menu.
Well, we as an association, Lamoga, and with our industry partners, we're going to continue to have a seat at the table and be at that table in these discussions. And we do look forward to working with you on all of these issues, including the carbon sequestration. We believe Louisiana is in a great position. Our geology, our infrastructure, and our industry, and the technology and those advances that are necessary for carbon sequestration. But Senator Cassidy, I don't see any questions coming in at this time, and I believe you have another commitment to get to. So any final thoughts before we part ways? But thank you so much for everything that you're doing and for being a champion for the oil and gas industry.
No, I thank you. I thank you for the jobs you're creating. Believe me, when Greg was talking as I got on, we need to do something to shore up. I am totally with you. I'm committed to it.
Okay, I lost you for a second, but I just want to say thank you again. We look forward to working with you. I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Thanks, Lori. It looks like our timing's pretty good. Thank you, Senator, for being with us. And thanks to everybody who's been part of the webinar today, in particular our partners, the Iberia Chamber of Commerce, One Acadiana, the Port of Iberia, Loga, and Lamoga. And we're going to leave you with this one message. As you move forward and talk to people about the importance of the industry, as you make decisions about your role in the industry and what you want Louisiana to look like into the future, we want you to speak up and go vote. Speak up about the industry, show your support for the industry, and go vote. You heard from Mike Moncla about Constitutional Amendment 2 and voting yes there. And then for those in Lafayette, Vermilion, and Acadia parishes, you have a decision to make around the district attorney. Ask the district attorney candidates who want your vote what they're going to do to dismiss the lawsuits against the industry in Vermilion Parish. It's important because it's important to the future of the industry. Show up. Continue to be a part of the legislative process. Talk to your parish council members, your police jury members in the state legislature, and help out. There's a lot of people in our industry, some of whom may even be on this webinar, who are trying to recover and make it through after the storms of this summer. And we need the people of the industry have always been there for each other. The industry has been here for Louisiana, and now's the time where we can't forget each other and we need to keep helping out. If you want more information about what we're up to, go to growlouisianacoalition.com, and you can find out anything you'd like. You can even give us your email to sign up for future news and things that happen along those lines. Thanks again for being here today. Thank you for supporting Louisiana Oil and Gas. Get out and vote. Thank you.